cameras if you don't want to be recorded. Oh, wait, there we go. We started the recording. So
okay, I just disabled the waiting room so we don't have to be interrupted. Welcome everyone, and I'm really happy to be here today. The reason that I decided to do this is because a lot's going on in the Shakespeare world, specifically about the First Folio, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what the First Folio is, so I'm going to try to explain all that in this talk. Some of you have probably heard some of this, but for the most part, this is going to be all new. So let me just see if I can get this going here. Oops. I don't want to do that. Sorry. Hold on. Okay. So I'm going to share the screen and good. Okay, so we can all see that. And I hope I put the sound right. Hold on. 1 second. Let me just stop the share and share. Okay. Great. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly, but and if you have any questions along the way, just put them in the chat group. Probably it's probably the best way to do it, and then we'll talk about it. So I call this FLYSPECKS in Shakespeare's First Folio, and I'm not going to talk about FLYSPECKS, but you could probably figure them out, and maybe somebody can let me know at the end. And it's the 400th anniversary of the publication of this book. So this book was published in 1623. Those of you, and I see several of you are from the 1619 project, we're talking about the same time period. All right. So all of this is going on in England as well as what's happening here in America. A lot of my information is going to be coming to you from the Folger Shakespeare Library. And this is in Washington, D.C. It's 2 blocks from the Capitol. And if some of you have been there, it's a fabulous place. It's closed presently because they're doing this huge construction program. This tells you a little bit about the Folger, that it is the world's largest collection of Shakespeare material and other stuff from the Renaissance. 50,000. We have drawings, they have watercolors, photographs, all kinds of material, costumes from the 19th century. It's just an amazing collection. There's this theater which performs Shakespeare plays all year round. However, as I said, all of this is closed because they're doing some major project. So the First Folio. This is a collection of the Shakespeare folios in the depths of I think it's 3 floors below ground in the Folger Library in a safe. And there are 750 copies printed. At the time, we think there are 233 in the world right now, and 82 of them are right here at the Folger. In 2016, we sent the First Folios to all 50 states and territories. It was an incredibly massive undertaking. I did a lot of workshops or presentations. We would go and do presentations around the book. People would come to see this First Folio and start weeping. People were proposing to their sweethearts at the First Folio. It was, we had incredible stories from around the world, around the country, about what that was about. And as I said, the second largest collection is in Tokyo. This is what the book looks like when you hold it in your hand. So the construction of the Folger is going to be a massive undertaking. Instead of going up these stairs into this main door, the entrance is now going to be below ground. It's a historic building, so they couldn't change the facade, but it's going to be below ground, and then you're going to walk into a giant visitor center. Again, this is supposed to open up in November. I don't believe it, but let's see. So what I found most interesting, and I just found this out last week, I'm sorry, this past weekend. What's going to happen, this is an artist rendering, what's going to happen with those folios is they're going to be on permanent display, all of them, in this glass, behind this glass window, hermetically sealed or whatever. I don't know what kind of details this, but each month, I think they'll take one of them out and display it here, where you can actually see it under glass. So it's going to be really fascinating. There's also going to be explanations about the folios on each side, I think some videos and stuff like that. So it's really kind of exciting. So the Folgers idea is to go much more about opening up to the public, and not just a private club. So the big question, why does it matter? Who cares about this thing? I'm going to just read you what it says right here, because this is kind of interesting. This is from Ben Jonson, and you can see his initials at the end. And it says, this figure that thou seest put, it was gentle Shakespeare cut, wherein the graver, that's the engraver, had a strife with nature to outdo the life. Oh, could he but have drawn his wit as well in brass as he hath in his face, the print would then surpass all that ever was in brass. But since he cannot, reader, look not on this picture, but his book. So this picture is by a guy named Droschot. It's very famous, and because it was published in this book by his friends and by Ben Jonson, who did some of the early material in it, most of the scholars feel that this is the closest picture of what Shakespeare really looked like, because there's lots of variations of it, lots of different portraits, but this is what we think is the most important one. So a little history. Gutenberg, 1393 to 1468. He creates the printing press in Germany. This guy, William Caxton, is very important because he's a merchant. He goes to Germany for business, and he sees this printing press and sees what's going on, and he decides to bring one back to England. By the way, the printing press has a lot to do with the Protestant Reformation. Think about that, and I'll answer it later on if any of you know the answer. So William Caxton comes there, and one of the first books they print is the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer. All right, and then in 1623, well, obviously they do that, and there's others in between. So here's a little taste of what the First Folio is important. Dramatic music.
The First Folio is a celebrity and certainly an icon of our culture. Anyone who's had any sort of schooling or even any exposure to popular culture knows about Shakespeare, sometimes even when they don't realize it. And the First Folio, there's something romantic about it. At Sotheby's, when we have a First Folio come up for auction, it really is an event. We get a lot of media attention from around the world. We get bidders and dealers from around the world. A couple of times when we've had First Folios, the sales have been evening events, which is unusual for a book and manuscript sale. So there's a whole energy that you don't get in a typical auction.
I do think that this is one of the, if not the single most charismatic books in the world. And people want to own it. People want to own it even if they have no intention of reading it.
Raymond Scott was just this guy who walked in off the street one day in June and had a book with him which he wanted to show to us, and I met him at tea. And he really was quite a character. I mean, he didn't look at all like anybody who ever frequents the Folger.
It was dramatic because of the way it was brought in. by a gentleman who purported to have come from Cuba, but he didn't. He was wearing designer sunglasses, which he never took off. He presented to Richard Kuchter a box of Cuban cigars, which are probably illegal in this country. But what Richard Kuchter saw was a desecrated book.
Of course, this was the worst place in the world to bring it because we're like folio central, you know, so if you're going to bring in a first folio that's possibly stolen, you wouldn't walk in the door of the one place in the world that knows the most about first folios.
Throughout the history of the First Folio, a number of people have tried to associate themselves with it. On one hand, we have Raymond Scott, an infamous character, and on the other, we have Queen Victoria.
Well, collectors love to have great things for their own sake, and I think also because they then become associated with those great things. The First Folio is a book that is particularly, I think, prone to that sort of collecting because it's so widely recognized.
Angela Burdett Coutts was one of the most remarkable women in Victorian England. She purchased a major First Folio. Well, the Queen heard about it, and the Queen gave Angela Burdett Coutts a piece of wood from Hearn's oak. That is the big oak tree that's mentioned in Shakespeare's play, The Merry Wives of Windsor, in order to have a casket made to house the First Folio. The box really is like a reliquary, and it's you know, it's not a piece of Shakespeare's hair or bone or something that's in there, but it's his book.
The folio continues to inspire creativity. In the 20th century, a scholar, Charlton Hinman, invented the Hinman collator to compare the text of 55 folios held at the Folger.
The Hinman collator is a massive machine with blinking lights. It's designed to detect variations between multiple copies of the same book. Charlton Hinman was a very interesting fellow. By 1949, he had a prototype and spent several years of intensive work collating these 56 copies of the First Folio. There was a tremendous effort to discover all these variants between copies, tabulate them, again, with the object of getting as close as possible to what Shakespeare actually wrote. I don't think his motivation was ever riches or even acclaim. I think it was a sincere desire to serve the memory of Shakespeare and his texts.
Hinman was clearly obsessed with the text of the First Folio, but of course Hinman's obsession was only possible because of Henry Folger's obsession with collecting the First Folio. Henry Folger understood that a serious study of the First Folio would require a number of them to be collected in one place. He collected over a third of those in the world, 82 in all. The Folgers never had children of their own, and so in some ways this collecting became the central purpose of their lives together. Some would say that the First Folio collection became a means by which Folger justified his wealth. It certainly is a great gift to the American people, and we are all the richer for it.
Never say that a book is always increasing in value, and yet historically when you look at the First Folio, that's exactly what's happening. The current record is just over $6 million for a fine copy that was sold in 2001. I have no doubt that if it came up, or a copy of comparable quality came up, the price would be even higher. Eventually, it's going to be a $10 million book.
Okay. Any questions so far? I should before I go on, just tell you a little bit about the Folgers. So Henry Folger was the president of Standard Oil of New York, and he had this idea about collecting Shakespeare. His wife was a Shakespeare lover, and they met over that, and they started collecting. They lived in Brooklyn, and they bought everything they could possibly can and stored it in various storage places in Brooklyn, including these books and everything else that they had. And then at some point, the story goes that they were in Washington, D.C., and they had some time between train rides, like from Union Station. They took a walk around Union Station and found this plot of land that unfortunately had people living in it. And they proceeded to buy up all of those houses and build a library there. There were plans, there were thoughts about putting it in New York. There were thoughts about putting it in some other places, but then finally they settled on Washington because he wanted this to be a library for all the people. Unfortunately, up until the last 20 years or so, it was not for all the people, but for a very limited amount of scholars. And that's all changed radically over the last 20 years. Gail Pastor, who you saw, was my boss at the Folger for a long time. And she started that project, opening it up, and the current director is doing even more so. So that's the First Folio. And of course, what I didn't mention is that I worked with the Folger on and off in various ways since 1986. And I finally left there in 2019, except I'm still involved in some things, but not a lot. Anyway, so some facts about the First Folio. Shakespeare's First Folio, 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death. This is this really bad poem that's on Shakespeare's grave, which he clearly did not write. But it says, good friends, for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be the man who shares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bone. Anyway, it's the first folio book ever published in England that was devoted exclusively to plays. So there were other folio books published, but this was the first one that just was plays. 36 plays, and it groups them into these categories. It's just, you could see comedies, histories, and tragedies. Currently, we have 4 categories. Scholars have redefined this, and several of the plays, including the Tempest and a few others, are now considered romances. So it's a slightly different category. So very, very, very important thing to remember. Never forget this. None of the plays in Shakespeare's handwriting exist. They just don't exist. So people think we have the manuscripts. We don't, and there aren't any anywhere in the world. This passage right here is from a book called a play that was never actually finished and produced, but Shakespeare sort of worked on it a little bit. And scholars, and don't tell me how they know this, have pretty much agreed that this is Shakespeare's handwriting right here. It's a play called Sir Thomas More. And we have the transcript of that as well. So it's really kind of interesting. But nothing of Shakespeare's handwriting exists. So the First Folio contains 900 pages. It's big, an engraved portrait, which you saw, and a lot of prefatory letters and poems. This is to the great variety of readers. I just want to read what this says, because I think it's kind of interesting. He says, to the great variety of readers. This is from the publishers themselves, Hemmings and Condell. To the great variety of readers, from the most able to him that can but spell. There you are numbered. We had rather you were weighed, especially when the fate of all books depends upon your capacities. That means money, and not of your heads alone, but of your purses. Well, it is now public, so you will stand for your privileges, we know, to read and censure. Do so, but buy it first, which is my favorite line. So yeah, this is not for browsers. You got to buy it, and apparently people did. 18 of the plays did not appear in print before the First Folio. So all of these plays would not exist, which is really interesting. The other plays, the other 18 plays, existed in small single play formats called quartos, and we'll talk about those later on. Okay. First Folio, they were printed one after another. The Tempest is the first play. We don't know why. Most critics, most scholars think that Shakespeare was one of the last plays that Shakespeare wrote, but they decided to put it in first. And we have no records of why they were doing stuff. This is interesting. Troilus and Cressida is in the First Folio, but it's not in the table of contents. And the reason is that they didn't have the permission to publish it. And then apparently they got it and they just said, let's stick it in anyway. So they just kind of put it right in there in the middle. Because of the way they were first printed and have been handled, no two First Folios alike. And you saw that Charlton Hinman machine that he was doing to try to compare them. Well, how could that be? They were printed in the same printing place over the years, but we'll investigate that in a little bit. It was prepared by two friends of Shakespeare, Hemming and Condell, and these were actors. And you see here, this is Shakespeare, the principal actors, from the, and it says William Shakespeare, Richard Burbage, who was probably the greatest actor in Shakespeare's era. And down here we see some of the others as well, including Hemmings and Condell. Okay. This waiting room stuff is annoying. I'm sorry. I don't know why we just can't open up to everybody. Okay, this is what a 16th century print shop would have looked like. This is actually one from Germany, the German print. It might be even a little earlier than this book. Excuse me. So I'm going to explain some of the characters here. So over here we see the actual typesetters. So they're pulling up these little tiny pieces of type and putting them into a wooden form, and then putting them into a bigger form and getting to print. Over here you see the copies of the play in handwritten. So these guys are reading these things and putting this type in here. Okay. This guy over here is taking those forms that they put the letters in and inking them. There's ink pads here, and he's inking them up. Okay, you can see this is a better picture of it. This guy is inking these plates, which are going to go into the press. This guy is the actual pressman. So he is taking the stuff, these pages, putting paper in, pressing it down. This Gutenberg invented his printing press based on a wine press. So this is sort of the background of that. Then we get, okay, this is another picture of the press. By the way, in this picture here, you see this guy setting type, and the capital letters were in the uppercase over here, and the lowercase letters were in the lowercase. So the term lowercase and uppercase comes from how they set type in those days. This guy is doing some proofreading, and he's looking over these pages now compared to what actually these guys set, and finding mistakes, because there's lots of mistakes. So what happens is they go back to this guy, and he is now going over the mistakes, and they're resetting some of the type, et cetera, et cetera. Then this goes back into the press, and it is continued. Okay, you can see again what's going on here. Here are some of the pages left to dry, which is kind of fascinating, I think. By the way, something about the press. These pads that you see, and you'll see a little bit better picture, a little bit. During when they were finished, to get the ink off and clean them up, they soaked them in uric acid. And as you probably know, the best source of uric acid is urine. So they would just put this in a bucket of urine overnight. So this place, from what we know, these places were dark, they were smoky, they were stinky as well. And this is the boss who's sitting around doing nothing except supervising and telling people what to do. So this is another little video about what this print process looks like. Okay. Let me go through this a little bit and then we'll take some questions. So the pages weren't set in order. In a folio, pages 1 and 4 are set at the same time on the same sheet of paper. And then page 2 and 3 were set together on a different sheet of paper. Okay. In quarto, it's pages 1 and 8 and at the same time, and I'll show you a video of that in a second. Actually, here it is. So this is what a quarto would be printed. So somebody, the typesetter had to do print page 1 and 8 and page 4 and 5 on the same block. All right. And then that would go into the press. And then they would take those letters out, they would clean them off, and they would start setting these pages. All right. Page 3 and 9, 3 and 6 rather, and 2 and 7. So in order to do that, what they had to do is work. Remember, they're working for these handwritten papers. They had to estimate and guess. So if you were looking at well, anyways, you get the idea. So they call that method casting off, estimating how many lines of the play could fit on a page. And the compositors sometimes added lines or left some lines out. So sometimes they just underestimated or overestimated. There's no codified way of spelling. So spelling is up to the compositor, really. You know, somebody's saying what the word is, and they're reading the words, and he's just making up his own spelling. They changed the spelling, they changed the punctuation. Sometimes it may be because of their own preferences, the amount of type. There's a great story about King Lear, which has a lot of questions in it, and the press that was printing the quarto of King Lear ran out of question marks. So they started taking semicolons and turning them upside down and using them to sort of look like question marks. And then after a while, apparently they ran out of those as well. So they just simply stopped asking, you know, there was no punctuation after a question, which is kind of interesting. So scholars, the scholars are nuts, and they can look at this stuff and they can figure out exactly where in the folio, they know which compositor is which and which compositor did this this play and which compositor did that play based on things like spelling choice and punctuation choice. So when they were doing that, this is what happened. This is from the folio. So in this scene, which is from The Winter's Tale, they had too much text, so they squish everything in, and you can see how that all works. This is the second scene. Here we have too little text. So what they did here is they put a lot of space here. They put a lot of space around the scene indication. They put a lot of space here, space and space. And here they did something really unusual. Anybody see what they did here? I'll just tell you. It says, oh, this is from King Lear. Oh, thou good Kent, how shall I live and work? What is there about that line? That line should be an iambic pentameter because it's one line. Oh, thou shalt, good Kent, and the same thing with the rest of this. So what they did is they took these verse lines and they split them to create more space because they didn't want to look too bad. So again, this is part of the issue. And here, this is what most of them look like. All right, they just kind of got it right. And here's another picture of a printing press. The proofreader compared the printed pages to the source, and that's what we're talking about, to the fair copy. Corrections were made. The uncorrected sheets were kept and used as well. So that's part of the issue. And what Henry Folger was collecting those books was because there are differences in them for reasons like this. All right, paper was expensive, so they didn't want to just throw away those mistakes, and they just left them in. They belong to the acting company, not to the individual author. No copyright rules. All right, all different people have their hands on it. There's so much just things going on. This is such a big project that's happening. So we do not know exactly what Shakespeare wrote, and they call this the instability of text. And Emily Folger wrote her master's thesis on this in 1896, and that's part of the reason they started collecting. So I'm going to stop sharing for a while here and see if anybody has any questions.
Mike, somebody has a question. They asked, why are these books called folios?
Great question. A folio is a standard name for a large format book. All right. So if you have a large format book, it's called a folio. And the reason they call this the first folio is because it's Shakespeare's first folio. It's not the first folio. Folios are printed. Bibles are printed in a folio format. I suspect, yeah, I do know. So Chaucer's Canterbury Tales was in a format of a folio format as well. So it's just, the folio is just a standard print size page. Doug Hodges, you have your hand up?
Yes, Mike. Okay, so I'm trying to understand this. So was this first folio, so there were around 750 of these, was this all a first edition? So did they, in other words, did they make 750 prints of that first page and, whatever would be 1 and 4, all at the same time?
Yes. I mean, it was a lengthy process, obviously, because it's 900 pages. But yes, it was done. Now, what I didn't say, and I wasn't going to talk about, but I should, is that there were several folios after that. So in 1623, this one comes out, I think 1624, 1625, we have the second folio, and then a year or two later, there's a third folio, and then a fourth folio. So they're all variations of those, and we have some of those at the library, but they're not nearly as important or valuable as that. But yeah, it was a printing of one. I think it was 800 books initially, or something, whatever the number I said was, and that was it. All right, and they apparently sold out pretty well, so that's why they decided to. Other people took it on and decided to do the second and third and fourth folio.
All right, thank
Karen,
you.
you have a question? You're muted still, Karen.
I should know that. I'm so curious. I understand that these folios were originally made for people to purchase back then, the original. But these were plays that were performed. Was there anything ever printed that, how did did actors about to perform a play learn their lines? Was there also something printed for them? What did they, in other words, I'm wondering how these folios, they were for collectors even at the time.
Yes,
Yeah. So was there something else that was printed
yes,
for
yes.
working actors?
Well, we're going to talk about the quartos in a little bit. You'll see that
Okay.
quartos were one of those things that were printed, and the term that they use is sides. So each actor might get his sides, and what they would do is they would have a scribe who would then write out the different parts of the different actors. So there'd be the last line that a person spoke, that somebody spoke, and then your lines. All right, and they would have those, and they were usually done on scrolls. So when they were working with it, they could actually scroll it up to do it. So yeah, so that's where they would have somebody actually rewrite them in script, for these actors.
Okay, thank you.
Just
Somebody else
another
had a question.
Jay. If the
Yeah.
folio was printed after Shakespeare died, who approved of their publication?
Those two guys, Hemmings and Condell, they were nobody approved. I mean, Shakespeare had nothing to do with them. And it was not like he had a plan to, do this, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't have a lot to do with any of the printing of the plays, actually. He was a director, I mean, he was an actor and a writer. And that's what he did. And then other people took those and did it. We're going to talk in a little bit about Hamlet, and one of the quartos, one of the editions is called people call it the bed quarto. There's lots of different theories about how it came to be, but we really don't know. So the approval was by those two guys, Hemmings and Condell. But again, they were working with Ben Jonson. So this was a big deal. Okay, any other questions?
I don't see any in the chat.
I'm sorry?
I don't see any more
Yeah,
questions.
okay,
in the
good.
chat. Mhm.
All right, so let us go back to Hamlet. So, good. And this is old Benedict Cumberbatch in this picture, which I really like. So, and again, this might explain a little bit more about it. So, 1602, Shakespeare writes Hamlet, all right, in this secretary hand. This is not his hand. Remember, this is not his, but that's what it looks like. They call this the foul papers, or a manuscript copy, all right? He then would share it with his company. They sit down and he'll read it to them and talk about it, whatever. Again, this is all theory, but that's fine. And again, no copies of his plays in his own hand exist. I shouldn't say that. This is a term that we used to use all the time. And one of the librarians, the Folger, corrected us when we were doing this 1619 tour. She said, you can't say that anymore. So we started prefacing with, as far as we know, no copies of Shakespeare plays in his own hand exist. All right. Because there's this eternal hope that they have at the Folger of finding this stuff under, somebody's garage or something. Anyway, so the acting company would hire a scribe who could write better and clearer, and this would be his job. He would take that stuff, and again, handwriting it, he would set it up and put the scenes and stuff like that. That they refer to that as a fair copy. We have fair copies of a play. This is a play called The Witch, by, I think maybe by Marlowe, I'm not sure. And it is, so we do have fair copies of plays, but not of Shakespeare's plays. And again, we don't know where they are. And then the scribe made unintended changes when he did this. No standard spelling. He might have used different words than the one Shakespeare wrote. He could have misread lines or left stuff out. So all these people, and none of these people, you have to understand too, none of these people in that picture I showed you of the printing room, none of those people are scholars. I mean, they don't, they're just workmen. And so they're not thinking about the poetry. They're not thinking about everything else. All right. So 1603, We know there have been performances of Hamlet and by his acting company. So that we know. And the first quarto is printed that year and is often called the bad quarto. People now don't call it that anymore, but it's just a convenient term. It's half as long as Hamlet, we know, and there are a few different theories about the origin of the play. And it says here, as hath been diverse times performed by His Highness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it gives you a little bit of that, and he can see who's here. The opening line, who's there? Nay, answer me, et cetera, et cetera. In 1604, the quarto 2 comes out and it's printed. And the title version, this says, it calls it the true and perfect copy, newly imprinted and enlarged to almost as much, like twice as much, again, as it was, according to the true and perfect copy. So they're saying, forget about that one. This is the real one. We think this Shakespeare's acting company authorized this one, but nobody knows for sure. So to answer Jay's question, these plays, when Hemington Condell got them, they were probably approved by Shakespeare, we think, earlier, because they had existed in this format. Shakespeare dies in 1616. Heming and Condell published the First Folio. It includes 36 plays, including Hamlet. Here's the thing. The folio version, which is F1, and Hamlet differs from the Q1 and Q2, those two versions I showed you. It's different as well. So we don't know the source that they used to write to put up this play. We don't know what that source is. And this gives you just a graphic idea. This is the bad quarto. The second quarto and the first folio was shorter. You see the difference in length. This line up here, to be or not to be, there's the point, to die, to sleep, is that all? All, as opposed to what we are familiar with. Okay, actually, I need a volunteer to read this. We have an English teacher out there. Somebody want to volunteer? Just unmute yourself and start talking.
I can read.
Please.
Rhonda. My lord, 'tis not this sable suit I wear, no, nor the tears that still stand in my eyes, nor the distracted
Behavior.
in the visage, nor altogether mixed with outward semblance, is equal to the sorrow of my heart. Him how I lost, I must of force forego, these but the ornaments and suits of woe.
So this, thank you so much. Don't go away, because I'm going to ask you to read one more thing. So this is from the first quarto. This is the scene very early on in Act 1, where Hamlet's mother, Hamlet's father has been killed by his uncle. Hamlet is maybe a little suspicious, and he's in mourning. And his mother says, Hamlet, stop mourning, cut it out, let's, get over it. And he says, it's not my clothes that I wear with tears, et cetera, et cetera. All right. It's, all of that. And then this one. So Rhonda, can you read this one, please?
Seems, madam? Nay, it is. I know not seem I have the pictures in the way.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I know not seems, 'tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath. No, nor the fruitful rower in the eye.
It's a river.
River, nor the detected hoyer of the visage, together with all forms, moods, hues of grief, that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play, but I have that within which passeth the show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe.
Thank you so much. Very good. Okay.
I'll be on Broadway next week. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's talk about the differences. Anybody see any differences they want to talk about? Just jump in if you do. We have inky cloak over here, and we have sable suit. black suit. He's wearing a black suit, or is he wearing inky cloak? What's the difference?
Sable, you have to use your imagination. Sable, you have to use your imagination.
Sable, you do?
Well, I think sable suit is much more, I mean, in my mind, it's a more expensive, it conjures a different kind of cloak than an inky cloak.
Yeah.
It's a very different way of describing it.
Good, good. And here's
Also the SS, the sable suit, it's a much more poetic way of writing it than ink cloak.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Anything else?
The second sounds more like what I think I've heard.
Yeah, this is the first folio is close to what we have, you know, what most of this performed right now.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. So remember the situation. This one says, "Him have I lost, I must of force forego. These but ornaments and suits of woe." Him have I lost. He's talking about his father here, right?
Yeah.
Him have I lost. He doesn't mention his father here. So even though this is the most, you know, the one that we most use, there's interesting stuff going on in this play, and this happens in several scenes. It happens. We're going to see one more scene, and I need a new volunteer to read this one. This is the scene that you all know and well about York, and we have all of these characters here. Okay, somebody want to read the Quarto 1 version of York?
I'll try it.
Sure.
If
Thank you,
nobody
Karen.
else would. Okay, Ham or him?
Ham. That's just the stage door. The
Okay, Ham. Was this? I prithee let me see it. Alas, poor York, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite mirth. He hath carried me 20 times upon his back. Here hung those lips that I have kissed 100 times. And to see, now they abhor me. Where is your jests now? Where's your jests now, Yorick? Your flashes of merriment.
Okay, so we all know the scene. His Yorick was the clown, whatever, the jester, and raised Hamlet. So he wore him on his back, and he kissed his lips 100 times. You know, so we have this whole vision. So this is Quarto 1, and then we see what happens when it gets to the first folio. You want to read it again, please?
Sure. Let me see. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And how abhorred my imagination is. My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed, I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar. No one now to mock your own leering? Quite.
Chop falling. Okay, great. So he bore him back 20 years here, and what happened? It becomes 1,000 times. Okay.
Yeah.
20 times becomes 1,000 times. He kissed those lips I have kissed 100 times, and here it says, I know not how often. All right. So simple things like that, and it's very radically different. Okay. Another thing about the folios, we have copies of the folio that are censored, and this is one, and it's the end of King Henry VIII, and you can see these lines locked out. This was a version by the Jesuits in Spain. There was a guy, a priest named Guillermo Sanchez, and they had a copy of this book, and he decided to edit it out, so he blacked out these different lines that he found offensive. And most interesting, I mean, it's a fascinating look to see what lines he left out. And most of them were political stuff. But when he got to the play Measure for Measure, he just ripped out the whole book. So all of that first folio is missing Measure for Measure, which, if you don't know it, is a very anti sort of religion play. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the rarest book in the Shakespeare Library in the Culture Collection. It's a single copy, which means no other copies of the first quarter. This is the quarter of Titus Andronicus exist. So it is worth whatever, very expensive. Okay. Sometimes what we're doing is we have students look at the quarto version and the folio and come up with their own, take the best of them as well. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing again, and Doug has a question. Go ahead, Doug.
So from what you just showed us, are we to believe then that the two actors were presumptuous enough to be editing Shakespeare? I mean,
Yeah,
because that's what it seems like. It seems like they were playing the role of editors, perhaps. And that also implies that, all these, the plays that we only have one copy of from the folio, that they were probably all edited in the same way.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. I mean, I think they probably took some liberties because we don't know. What we don't know is what they used, and that's why this Hamlet's example is the best, because they could have used Q1 or Q2, but they didn't use them, so they used something else, and we don't know what it is. And now it's not that radically different from the second quarto, but it is different. So it's kind of intriguing. Terry Germain asked a question about did the actors ever improvise, and yes and no. I mean, we don't know. We don't know, but we suspect they do, particularly in some of the comic roles. I think. I think the Porter scene in Macbeth is often done that way today in performances where they'll ad lib some stuff. So maybe. Debbie, you have a question.
Well, I don't really have a question. I'm an actor, and I've been fortunate enough to be in several Shakespearean plays. But being an actor, I've actually been in a lot of original plays, and they do evolve as you're working on them. So yes, and there's a lot of interaction in an original play. There's a lot of interaction with the writer. And so the writer will change things as you go along. And sometimes the actors will improvise things and change things as you go along. And then the author sometimes likes them and incorporates them into his written work if it's going to be published, whatever.
Yeah, and we do know that Shakespeare was there. I mean, he was.
He was there. He was an actor.
So because he was there, and we don't. There's a lot of theory that he didn't do a lot of acting, but he was always there and with these guys. So if he also, one of the things that Shakespeare doesn't have in the First Folio or anywhere is stage directions. So he doesn't tell you, unlike modern playwrights or 20th century playwrights, Tennessee Williams had tons and tons of stage directions, telling his actors who are going to perform it how to perform this line, where you should be shouting, where you should be whispering, where you should be moving, where you should be shaking your fist. All of that stuff is in there in modern plays. Shakespeare has none of that. So what I always suspected is that Shakespeare probably did that kind of direction with his people. I mean, there was no such thing as a director in those times, but Shakespeare probably served that capacity as well. And as you're right, Debbie, he certainly would have rewritten stuff and said this line's not working right. So we don't know. Okay, any other questions? Good. Okay. Okay, so as I promised you, we're going to take a look at this. I hope we have time to get this in. And this is just some fun little thing about Shakespeare's language. So my good friend Martha Harris did this for this magazine that I was editing years ago, and then somebody actually put this into a PowerPoint, and then I modified it, and I'm using it. So we'll take a look at this. So and I'll just read this line. These are unusual weeds for each part of you to give a life, no shepherdess, but Flora appearing in April's front. it's a gobbledygook, all right? What does it mean? And I'm just gonna leave this on here because my voice is going, but you can see what's going on. Okay, so the more you read it, the more you'll start to understand. And that's true. And I saw that with my students all the time. When we'd read several plays in a row, and by the time we got to the second or third play, they could do it easily. They could read the language. Okay, so students always ask, did people talk like that in Shakespeare's day? No, they didn't. But he's writing poetry, so they spoke in verse. And he has a familiar type of rhyme in verse. Mary had a little lamb, London Bridge is falling down, double, double, toilet trouble. So you can see that we've used verse all over the place. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about iambic pentameter. Most of the time, Shakespeare's poetry had a different type of pattern. Doesn't rhyme, it has a beat. Da 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 da. All right, 10 syllables in a line. The beat goes on and on. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. So it's sort of built in. All right. And again, this is what it looks like in the play. If he wrote it out in verse, this is what I'm sorry, in prose, it would look like this. As Shakespeare developed, the more he developed into his later plays, he used less verse and more prose, more narrative prose like this. Okay, he got away from verse as he got older. Okay, so sometimes we have two characters sharing a line. Mad for thy love, my lord, I do not know. All right, two characters reading the same thing, but keeping that beat together, which is really kind of interesting. And you could hear it. I mean, when you're in the theater, they're not going to overemphasize it like I am, but you'll still, it just sort of works on your brain that way. All right, and you read from period to period, a semicolon, you don't stop at the end of a line. Students tend to do that all the time, and it's not right, and it doesn't make sense. So it says, she had not been long before she became a joyful mother. You have this arrow here. And you stop at the end, and then you read the next line, and you stop at the end. Right, and if you read out loud, the meaning will become a little easier. Shakespeare wrote the plays to be scripts to be spoken. The these and thous. So 400 years ago, people used thee, thou, and thine in thy speech. And if you remember, some of the language in church would use the thee and the thou probably still today. Certain kinds of people in certain kinds of situations. Lovers, wherefore art thou? Masters to servants, is not thy master with him? Family members. Okay. You have to change the pronouns. You have these different verb endings. I am, you are, thou art. I laugh, thou laughest. I give, she giveth, thou givest. You get the idea. Other word changes. So I have other words. Words we don't use anymore. So these are some of the words that just don't exist they exist, but we don't use them. Bartle's bear. Words that look the same but have different meanings. So I could fancy more than any other. I could like. Examine away your blood. This one is, we could still probably figure out what they mean. He's as tall as any man in Illyria. Tall at that point meant brave. And again, using the word liked in a different way. Word order. This is really fun. You like to play around with word order. to keep things interesting. He rearranged words. This is a line we use a lot. That handkerchief did an Egyptian to my mother give. And what I would do is I would have students take these words and put them on separate cards and mix them up and try to put them in an order that they think they would work. And they never got the right order. They never got Shakespeare's order. They got, which is this, an Egyptian did give that handkerchief to my mother. That's what it's saying, but this is how Shakespeare wrote it. He had omitted letters and words. All to England, unless I have mistake, etc., etc. Shakespeare's vocabulary, more than any average person of our times. College, this is interesting. Average vocabulary of a college-educated person today is 15,000 words. Shakespeare's vocabulary, 30,000. Okay, this is something that's a controversy. He created new words and played around with words and puns. What we think is that he did not necessarily create these words. They may have been in the common language, and he just put them in print for the first time. So let's change. Why did Shakespeare do all these things? Sometimes to make the words fit beats, sometimes because of the rhyme, sometimes he liked to play with words, and mostly because the words sound good that way. And that's the end. You get an idea, and that just gives you a quick overview of how these words worked. Okay, Debbie says we were always directed to read the lines as if they were prose. Yeah, explain that, Debbie. You're muted.
Yes. It's pretty much what you said before. You don't stop at the end of lines. You don't read it as if it's poetry. You read it as if it's prose. It makes much more sense that way to the audience. And I was just reinforcing what you said.
Yeah, and if any of you had taught Shakespeare when you were, any of you English teachers out there taught Shakespeare, it was a thing that students would always do. They would always stop at the end of a line, and you always have to say, no, don't do that.
Right. And I had another comment that the way he switched the words around, and put them in a different order to make them amusing. I thought maybe the character Yoda might have been based on Shakespeare.
Yes, actually, quoting Yoda used to be a good way to get students to understand about language, about how Shakespeare plays with word language. Okay, any final comments? Anybody have anything they want to add? Thank you for waking up so early to be hearing today.
Thank you very much. Wonderful.
And again, I paid attention because I think you're going to see more about this. Shakespeare's birthday is the 23rd of this month, which is when we wanted to do this, when I wanted to do this presentation. But there's been a lot of stuff written about this. I just got 2 articles today about the First Folio. So you'll be seeing a lot more about the First Folio, and you guys are going to be the experts now, so you can tell all your friends what it's all about. I hope this helps. Understand.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you.
Mike. Thank you very much.
Loved it.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Michael, when did you say the library's
Thank
due to
you.
open again?
Oh, November, they said, but it's not going to happen in November. I can't imagine it will.
Well,
But
I'm
there's
going
gonna
down
be
to DC next week, so I won't bother going.
You can go by, but you're not going to get in. I mean, literally, we're not. Our offices, the offices, nobody's in there at the building except the workmen. They had this giant tree, which was on the far on the right side of the building, and the first thing they did is they moved this tree to the left side of the building because they changed all the gardens, and it's like a huge project, millions and millions of dollars, but we'll see what happens when it opens.
To go for a class trip.
Really?
That'd be great.
You
Yeah.
could certainly do a virtual one. That's no brainer.
Well, again,
So-
thank you, Michael. and
Yes, thanks.
You all
Thank you, Liz.
It's fabulous.
participating.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you for my